arcs. Okay, straight lines are boring. People hate straight lines. In the real world, things don't actually usually move in straight lines. It's one of the ways you can make something look very real and organic is by having these arcs. Everything in the real world moves in arcs. If you look at the way my hand is moving, it moves in an arc. Okay, there's a pivot point and it twists and there's an arc. Okay, we're going to be doing a lot of rotation. We're going to be doing a lot of translation to try and get these arcs to appear that don't actually exist and are basically they're extra work sometimes. But the good thing about them being extra work is it really makes things look much more fluid, much more alive. And that's really what the effect we want to achieve is to make things look alive. Heck, if you just watch my head, like it goes in a circle, right? It's all about the curves, okay? Curves have more appeal than straight lines, and that is just overall just gonna make things look better. Secondary animation. So secondary animation is essentially other pieces of animation that are falling into place. They have the exact same rules, the exact same setup, but it's a smaller part of the bigger whole, okay? It's more so along the lines that we don't want to distract from the main thing going on, right? It's all the extra stuff that happens, all the extra little bells and whistles, if you will. The usual example is like, for example, if I'm walking, then, you know, my wrists, my arms, all that other stuff that are going together, that are little separate pieces, those guys are kind of like secondary animation, right? They are important to the overall piece, but the individual parts are what make up this whole animation. Easier to understand in 2D. We're gonna find a way to explain these better for the web. Timing. Timing is by far the single most important thing here, especially on the internet. So one of the issues with CSS animations is the fact that your control of timing isn't very simple because you're dealing with percentages. And in the real world, people don't understand percentages. And as an animator, you don't understand how percentages really work because that doesn't quite translate the way you want it to, right? What is 30% of 1.3 second animation? I don't know, right? So it's not quite straightforward. It's a little more involved. Timing is very, very important, especially important when you start to put all these pieces together, right? Because the overlap has its own timing, the main action has its own timing, secondary action has its own timing. The important thing is not all things happen at the same time. Things happen at different points. That's why you have overlap, that's why you have secondary animation, that's why you have all these things going on, right? And while they're all going on, they each have their own timing. And because they have their own timing, things feel much more organic, right? I keep coming to that word organic because the reality is that on the web, you want things to look organic. You want things to look like that. Exaggeration is the next one. So exaggeration is pretty self-explanatory. That one's probably the easiest to understand. When you're exaggerating something, you're trying to just take what you're communicating and just push it a little bit past that, right?
Oh, you're mine. Oh, won't you roll?
Now, Looney Tunes would do this all the time with extreme poses.
La, la, la.
You'll be doing more or less of these principles depending on the type of animation you're doing, what you're animating, but the point is that being familiar with something like exaggeration works great when you have more of a cartoony vibe, but even if it's supposed to look realistic, the exaggeration is really just to bring about what we call strong posing, a strong visual cue as far as how things are going to be moving, right? If you're stretching, you might want to stretch it just a little bit more. If you're hitting a pose, if you're trying to bring a little bit more attention to it, that anticipation bit can be exaggerated just a little more, okay? So the last two, solid drawing and appeal. These I'm going to kind of put together. The reason why is because solid drawing, once again, it's it's kind of hard to say because you're going to be on the web how that exactly translates. Depending on the situation, you might be given graphics by somebody else, or you might be making your own. Either way, the important part of this is going to be not only that the visual piece is well put together, that's a solid drawing, but the next principle is a little more involved, which is appeal. You're doing all of these things, all these different things, the arcs, the squash, the stretch, the overlap, all of that, all for what's called appeal. The reason why we're doing this is to make our item, our visual pieces, have the appearance that they have a little bit more life to them, that they're not just a mechanical piece or chunk of blocks and circles that are moving around. No, we want those blocks and circles to become an actual item that we reflect on, that we relate on. Okay? When we start to believe that that thing inside there is a living thing, it creates some appeal. If we can take this exaggeration, if we can take the arcs and we can do all that stuff, things look visually more interesting. They have a little bit more character. They have a little bit more personality. They have a little bit more involvement back and forth. The inanimate objects on your website, on your client's website, whatever the case is, those items can have appeal. They can have a personality. We can make the inanimate objects look like they have a little bit of extra life to them and give them a little bit of a personality to some extent, okay? This isn't about making things look like they're moving so they can look like they're moving. It's about making things look more appealing and more interesting and more organic. Guys, those are the 12 principles of animation in a nutshell. If you did not understand them all, that is completely okay. As we go through this process, we'll start to see them more in depth. The important thing I really wanted to get across was by having these things in mind ahead of the game, what you're doing is as you start to build stuff up, what you're actually doing is you're preemptively preparing the animation in your mind before you start typing anything on the keyboard. And when you're planning from the beginning, you're not having to try and fix a lot of things. And the reality is that with code, it's not as simple and straightforward as it would be with a drawing or any sort of software that's specifically designed for animation of characters or objects or anything like that. Okay, we're not dealing with After Effects, we're not dealing with Maya or Blender or anything like that. We are dealing with JavaScript, and we are dealing with CSS animations, right? Even though I am referencing these things that are not on the web, that are not currently the way things might be seen online, the reason I'm bringing them up is because they may not be very apparent right now. They may not be, everywhere right now, but this is going to start changing. We're going to start making some sort of revolutionary change that is going to make this happen. And it's not a simple skill set to do animation regardless of how you're doing it, let alone inside of code. Your stuff is going to look different and you're going to feel it differently. Thank you for watching, guys. Please like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any questions, please comment down below. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.